Members of the jury, you must not be influenced by any personal likes or dislikes, prejudices, or sympathy. Under our law, every defendant charged with a crime is presumed to be innocent until his guilt has been established beyond a reasonable doubt. This presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial. It's essential that you not base your verdict upon anything other than the evidence and the evidence alone. The opening statements, the summations, the arguments, and other remarks of counsel are not evidence. Evidence is the sworn testimony of witnesses plus the exhibits. Each of you must individually agree on the verdict. You must each decide the case for yourself. However, you do have a duty to consult with each other, but you should never surrender your honest conviction as to the weight of the evidence or the effect of the evidence solely because the opinion of your fellow jurors or merely to return a verdict. Whatever your verdict be in this case, it must be by unanimous vote of you, the jury. Now, reasonable doubt means a doubt based upon reason. Such a doubt is often defined as an actual doubt which you are conscious of after you have gone over all the testimony of the case and have given consideration to each and every part of the evidence or lack of evidence. When, after such consideration, leaves your mind in a state of uncertainty so that you're not fully convinced of the defendant's guilt. And when you have that doubt that seems reasonable to you, that sort of doubt is a reasonable doubt. When such a doubt exists, you must give the benefit of that doubt to the defendant and acquit him. On the other hand, if no such reasonable doubt exists, it's equally your duty to convict the defendant. Now, Section 60.45 of our criminal law provides that the statement of a defendant is involuntarily made and therefore may not be considered by the jury if it is obtained by the police or by a prosecutor, 1, by means of the use of force or by the threat of the use of force, or 2, in violation of the defendant's rights under the Constitution of the United States or of this state. These constitutional rights include the right to remain silent and the right to the advice and assistance of a lawyer before the defendant answers any questions or gives a statement to the police or prosecutor. In this case, the defendant claims that statements made by him to the detective and to the assistant district attorney were made involuntarily. He contends that his statement was involuntary because he did not receive his constitutional Miranda warnings until the morning of March 26th, after he had given the statement to the detective. He further contends that his statements were involuntary due to the psychological coercion consisting of isolation, lack of sleep, deprivation of food, and persistent, intimidating questions. The crimes with which the defendant is charged are crimes which require intent. Intent is defined by the penal law of the state as a situation which exists when a person has a conscious objective to cause the acts with which he is charged. If you find from the evidence that the defendant did not have a conscious objective to bring about the violations of the law of which he's accused, you must find the defendant not guilty of those crimes. In order for you to find the defendant guilty of the crime, murder in the second degree, the people are required to prove from all of the evidence in the case, beyond a reasonable doubt, each of the following 3 elements. 1, that on or about November 10th, the defendant, John Knight, strangled or aided and abetted in strangling Teresa Foreman. 2, that the defendant intended to strangle Teresa Foreman or intended to aid and abet another in strangling her. 3, that such strangulation caused the death of Teresa Foreman. And if you find all of these 3, then you may find the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree under count 1. The second count of the indictment charges the defendant, John Knight, with the violent felony of rape in the first degree. In order to find the defendant guilty of the crime, the people are required to prove from all of the evidence in the case, beyond a reasonable doubt, each of the following 3 elements. First, that on or about November 10th, the defendant engaged in sexual intercourse with Teresa Foreman, or that he aided and abetted another in engaging in sexual intercourse with her. Sexual intercourse has its ordinary meaning and occurs upon penetration, however slight. Second, prosecution must prove that the defendant engaged in such sexual intercourse or aided and abetted another to engage in such sexual intercourse without Teresa Foreman's consent. Third, the government must prove that the lack of consent of Teresa Foreman resulted from the use of forcible compulsion by the defendant or by another whom he aided and abetted. Once all three of these are proved beyond a reasonable doubt, then you may find the defendant guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree. Now, according to the law, forcible compulsion means to compel by either use of force or the threat, either express or implied, that places a person in fear of immediate death or physical injury to herself, or in fear that she will be immediately kidnapped. If you find that people have failed to prove to your satisfaction beyond a reasonable doubt any one or more of these three elements, then you must find the defendant not guilty of the crimes of rape in the first degree.